this whole mess. We couldn't go on ignoring that anymore. We had to fight for what could be right and good again in the name of God. You look like a smart guy. You had the dreams too. You know this to be true. And here's the kicker. The voice in our dreams gave us your name and where to find you. It said that you, Art, are the fulcrum. Yes, you. I know it's a lot, and don't take this the wrong way. It's as hard for me to swallow that we're headed to Boulder as it is for me to believe that you're the most important man left alive. But I know it to be true because, well, God said so. God? Yeah, you know, he speaks through the woman in the dreams. Henry went on another rant that I'll trim down a bit, saying that the people on the other side were enthralled to evil incarnate, to the devil himself, and that they would destroy us all if Art didn't help. Henry didn't know what the plan was or exactly where Art fit into it, but only that, for now, Art was the plan. Art would tip the scales in their favor and eradicate evil from the world once and for all. Henry was exultant. Despite the other terrors to come, his rapturous tone scared Art the most. Art shook his head and said, "None of this should come down to me. It's all bullshit. The Lord works in mysterious ways, yeah?" Henry said, "Look, I know that you're scared, Art." Art punched out a few more chords, short and sharp. He said, "I'm not scared. I'm angry. You should be too." Art told Henry about how the day after his parents died, his two younger cousins, Aaron and Dan, ages 13 and 9, showed up on his doorstep. Their parents had died too, and they didn't know where else to go or what to do. Their first night at his house, Art dug out a road map from his mom's car, and they marked up a route they would take to Provincetown on the tip of Cape Cod. They unanimously decided to live on one of the ends of the world. The next morning, Aaron and Dan were full of phlegm and were too weak to climb out of their shared pull-out couch bed in the TV room. Before she became incoherent with fever, Aaron narrated future versions of the Aaron and Dan who lived in an alternate universe, one in which the superflu never happened. She went on for hours, giving an incredibly, almost impossibly detailed account of their hectic high school years, romantic partners, colleges attended, friends made and friends lost, one with a career in radio as a production engineer, and the other bouncing from one odd job to the next, but finding happiness in their freedom. The cities lived in and cities visited, their hopes and dreams, their joys and longings, their successes and failures. Dan silently listened to his sister, never once objecting to her vision. When it became too much for Art, he'd retreat to the kitchen and cry, but he still heard her melancholic and beautiful story echoing through his house. Art paused, seemingly mid-story, wiped his forearm across his eyes, took off his guitar, and said, "I'm not going anywhere with you, or anyone else." I have to admit, that answer was a complete and total shock to me, and it was a shock to Henry, too. He spluttered and stuttered, eventually saying, "Hey, look, I get it, I do. But you're not the only one who suffered. That's exactly my point. You think God made the superflu? Word on the street is that it was man-made. I'm sure it was. But what about all the suffering in every decade of every century? And it was allowed to happen, which, okay, it was consistent behavior at least. The problem I have is that God chooses to show up now." Henry rubbed his head like it hurt, like the ideas were too big to fit inside. "Hey, man, I'm no theologian, but God has always been around. And we don't know how often, God intervened on our behalf, right? We can't question. We should always question. And here's a few more for you. Is God showing up now because he forgot about us previously? Are we an oil spill that happened due to neglect and the Almighty is rushing in to clean up? Was the entirety of human existence orchestrated? The savagery, the knowledge, the longing, the loving and the hating, the genocides, the wars, the nuclear bombs, the engineered viruses. To get to this exact point in time so those who remain could what? Take up arms in his name for the final showdown? Henry shouted, "Stop! Enough! I can't believe you're choosing the other side. You're choosing evil. I never said I would go with the people headed to Las Vegas. Fuck them too. You choosing not to be with us is choosing to be with them. No, it isn't. I'm choosing a third option, which is to reject the both of you, to reject any further demands for blood sacrifice. I refuse to participate. So, what? You're just going to sit on the sidelines and do nothing while evil threatens us all? If anyone comes to my doorstep, I will help them. And if they ask, I will advise them to not go west. The seafood is way better out here." Henry then ranted about the will of God, the honor of being chosen. His enemies would be bathed in cleansing, righteous fire, blah, blah, blah. You have to admit, Henry was proving himself not to be the best representative for the good guys. Art continued fully embracing his La Herrera, Prince with 1,000 Enemies role when speaking with Lord. Huh? No, it's a reference to Watership Down. Dude, read a book. We'll hit a library tomorrow. You have plenty of time for reading now. Anyway, by the time Henry finished his fire and brimstone entreaty, he was sweating and breathing heavy. "Look, I don't mean to be a wise ass," Art said. "It has been a rough month for us all. I'll admit that I am scared. You should be too, by the way. I don't know why you think being chosen or even noticed by that kind of power is a blessing and not a fundamentally terrifying curse. I mean, fuck, I don't know. I'm not explaining my position very well. But, okay, how's this? A week or so ago, when I was in the kitchen, crying and listening to my cousin Erin's voice narrate the beautiful story of what could have been or what could be somewhere else and sometime else, her voice was the voice of God. That's the voice I entrust my humanity to, not the one you're hearing." Henry loosened a deep sigh. "I'm going to come back later with others, with my group, and you'll see they're good people, Art, people worth fighting to save. If I say no again, what will your good people do then?" Henry left without answering, without thanking Art again for the use of his towel. Once the front door closed, Art walked around the house, looping a circuit through the first-floor rooms. He muttered to himself. It was difficult for me to hear, but I think he was rehashing what he and Henry had said, and he was trying to come up with better ways to explain himself. Or maybe Art was trying to better explain himself to himself. About 10 minutes into his walk around the house, he stopped in the dining room and punched the wall. I don't know why he needed more pain, more hurt, but he did. His knuckles indented the wallpaper and plaster. He shook out his hand and then resumed his laps, walking faster and faster until his walk was a jog and his jog was a sprint, and eventually he ran out of gas and collapsed into a chair at the kitchen table. He cried softly, as though afraid someone would hear him, and he fell asleep. I hated seeing Art like this, and I was gobsmacked over what had transpired during the visits. I was proud of him, but also, I have to admit for the first time, a little afraid of him too. So much so, I thought about sneaking out of the basement and going somewhere else. But I stayed and listened and pondered. Art woke up when it was full dark, inside and out. He lit a candle that squatted on a small plate, and he slowly carried it out of the kitchen. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to say something. I unlatched the basement door. Huh? Never you mind how I did that. Don't interrupt now. We're almost at the end. I opened the creaking basement door slowly, trying not to startle him. He froze in place with the candle dish quivering in his cupped hands. Once he saw it was me, he shook his head and laughed a little. I laughed too, and our laughter grew and stretched out. It was the best way, the only way, to say hi and break the glacier that had grown between us. I wanted to tell him I understood why he was angry. Believe me, did I ever? I wanted to tell him I appreciated the sentiment of his rejecting the visitors and their offered choices. I wanted to tell him he'd never been more fully, maddeningly, wonderfully Art Barbara than he was now. I wanted to tell him he was noble, but it was a chasing windmills kind of noble. I wanted to tell him he was not being pragmatic or realistic, which meant that he had passed over the border into the land of the immature and foolish. I wanted to tell him that the phrase of cutting off your nose to spite your face had been invented for him. I wanted to tell him that blood had always and would always lubricate the grinding gears of the universe. But he didn't need to hear any of that from me. Not then. Hey, you and me, let's go to Boulder, I said. We don't have to go with anyone else. Certainly not Henry. He's probably destined to die from an infection after getting a splinter, or maybe touchdown Jesus will call him back to Notre Dame. Art stopped laughing, but he'd kept a smile on his face. He said, No. It was quiet, soft, and I hoped it meant, despite everything, that we were still friends. Fair enough. Let's go somewhere else then. Anywhere else, I said. Find a place where you can plug in a guitar amp and rock out. I'm not leaving, he said. In retrospect, I regret saying anything to him. I think he refused my let's make like a tree and leave options because I presented them. If I'd instead found a way to lead him into suggesting we flee the house, then he'd still be with us. It would be me and him sitting by this fire with you, and that fucking haunts me. I said, I know it sucks, but you really should leave. There are far scarier things afoot than an energy vampire. His half-smile melted away. In the flickering candlelight, he looked so scared and so damned young, younger than the beautiful, maddening, obstinate 19-year-old he was. Tears filled his eyes, and he couldn't look at me anymore. I fear in that moment I had stolen his hard-won, regained inner peace, and cannot forgive myself for doing so. Maybe I am an energy vampire after all. Art nodded at me, or he nodded at everything, tears rolling down his cheeks, and he left the dining room, taking the light with him. I knew I couldn't save him, but I couldn't leave him. Not yet. At the very least, I could be Art's witness. So I went back down to the basement and waited in the dark. I didn't have to wait long. There was a pounding on the front door, then a hyena-like laugh. A mob of purposefully heavy footsteps circled the house's perimeter, and there were harsh knocks on the windows and outside walls, and they called out Art's name. Just his name, over and over. They sounded like crows, but they weren't crows. Their footsteps lightened and multiplied and were now paw steps. The tittering and laughter became howls and growls and sharp-pitched barks. One of them smashed through the door of the kitchen, and the others swarmed inside. Their nails and claws scrabbled across the linoleum. I still heard their scrabbling nails over Art's awful screams, and I heard the nails after. as I opened the bulkhead and crept out of the basement and into the night. About 2 blocks away, I had to duck into a row of bushes to avoid the pious tool Henry and a group of 6 others. The others carried long flashlights and baseball bats, and one had a shotgun. Make of that what you will. Whatever I made of it, it pissed me off. So after they passed me, I jumped up from my hiding spot, further inserting myself into the story, and shouted, "Hey, Hank!" The group stopped and turned, but did not double back toward me. "You don't have to worry about Art anymore," I said. "He's gone." Henry shouted, "He went with them?" "No, dumbass," I said. "Art is gone. Gone, Daddy, gone." On cue, the night air echoed with howls. I've always had impeccable timing. Almost apologetically, as if a spell had been broken, a few in Henry's group mumbled questions, asking if it was too late. Could they still help Art? But they stopped asking in the weight of my silence. Henry invited me to go with them. I laughed and told him that maybe I'd run into him later, hoping it came off as mysteriously and threateningly pithy. So yeah, that's where Art's story ends. I miss him like I lost a limb. What? No, I haven't run into Henry again. Not yet. That certainly would make a cleaner and tidier kind of end. But good stories, real ones, or the ones that feel real, don't wrap up so neatly. Besides, stories don't really end, do they? Well, I suppose the stories will end when all the storytellers are gone, but there are still a few of us stubbornly kicking around. Let's wait until the morning to talk about where you or I are headed next. Let's not spoil this moment we had, are having. I want to savor it like the fine meal it was. Hey, man, you're exhausted. Look at you, you can barely keep your eyes open. You get some rest. Don't worry, I'm not tired yet. I'll stay up and tend the fire. Keep watch for a bit. Make sure none of them cannonball vampires show up. They are a pesky lot. Tomorrow, you and I will figure out where the story goes from here tomorrow. It's gotta go somewhere, right? Sweet dreams.
The Mosque at the End of the World. Usman T. Malik. They met the blind mullah and his dog by a haunted mosque in Sheikhupura on the outskirts of Lahore. The mosque, a narrow, green-domed structure flanked by 2 minarets, was situated on the highway between a tire shop and a bakery. In the shade of its eastern wall, the old man lay on a charpai, puffing smoke from a gurgling hookah. By his head, a cloud of flies buzzed over a jar of honey placed on a stool, an oak wood walking stick propped against the latter. The dog, a droopy-eared, spotted mongrel half hidden under the jute-twine bed, panted by the man's sandals in the afternoon heat. Occasionally it lapped at the red clay bowl of water in front of it. Nasir rolled Parrot to a stop before the mosque's entrance, but kept the motor running. He glanced at Palvasha sleeping in the rear, head against the rickshaw's canvas door, a thread of spit dangling from her mouth. She stirred when sweat from her forehead trickled down her cheek in a glistening line. Nasir turned and swiveled the battery-operated fan in the partition toward her. He retrieved the revolver from the partition compartment, slipped it into his vest, and smoothed the cotton camise over it. Then he stepped out, looked up and down the deserted highway, and, lifting a hand in a friendly greeting, walked to the man on the charpai. "Salaam alaikum, Bhaijan," he hailed the man in his accented Urdu. "My name is Nasir Khan. I'm traveling with my niece and we're looking for some food if you could spare any. We have things we can trade." Dreamily, the man blew out a smoke ring and sat up on the charpai's mattress. He lifted his white farmer turban with an age-spotted hand and scratched his head. Nasir Khan, eh? Where's home? Where'd you come from, son? Balakot, Bahaijan. I worked at a hotel there. The man nodded, his milky white gaze on the highway, and replaced the turban on his head. You're a long way from home, aren't you? The dog had slipped out from its resting place and stood watching Nasir, its head tipped to one side. It was larger than Nasir had initially thought, its tail curled like the noisemakers he had seen balloon vendors sell in Abbottabad before the Vaba. When he took a step forward, it growled. Easy, boy, we're all friends here, Nasir said to the dog soothingly in Pashto, then switched back to Urdu. I gather he won't bite? Up close, the furrows in the man's forehead were deep, the wrinkles around his cataract-clouded eyes thick like spiderwebs. A black taviz hung around his neck. His chest-length beard was oiled and entirely white. He must have been in his 70s. He got up, stretched, one large brawny hand on his low back, and felt the ground with his feet. He found his sandals and slipped them on. Hero won't hurt you, will you, Hero? The dog wagged its tail and gave a short bark. The man bent and petted its head. He's watching out for me. We both watch out for each other. Such are the days, aren't they, Hero? Hero craned his head back and licked the man's hand. In his previous life, Nasir hadn't liked dogs. They were dirty, and touching them broke your vuzu, so you had to do ablution again before praying namaz, but now he found himself reaching out to caress the animal's head. Hero yipped and retreated, then nosed forward, his tail stiff and moving powerfully from side to side. He sniffed Nasir's hand a few times and tentatively began to lick it. Good dog, Nasir said, wishing he had a piece of bread or a bone for him. How long have you two been here? We never left, you see. The old man patted under the edge of the mattress and came up with a small tin can. He fished around in it with gnarled fingers and brought out a key ring, jangling with keys. We stayed right here through it all, watched the entire city die. That was 3 months ago. Sheikhupura's population before the Vaba was 2 lakhs, 200,000 people. He sighed and gestured east toward Lahore. Lahore nearly 40 lakhs. 40 lakhs. And what about all the villages between here and Lahore? Everyone is gone. Every mosque between here and Lahore, and for all I know the entire world, deserted. No one to take Allah's name anymore. How could I abandon my mosque to owls, bats, and jinns? Nah, son, I will stay here in the shadow of my elders until I'm dead too. Nasir watched him pick up the walking stick and shuffle to a side door of the mosque, the dog following on his heels. The man opened the heavy padlock on the hasp. Stupid to lock up now, but force of habit. It's the only thing that keeps us alive, you know. Force of habit. He called back over his shoulder. You hungry? I have plenty of canned food and... Hero, keep out. He prodded the dog gently with his foot to nudge him away from the doorstep. You know you aren't allowed in there. Hero sat down at the threshold, head on his paws, and gave a little whine as Nasir came to the door. Nasir's gaze went to the graveyard behind the mosque, hundreds of ancient marble headstones jutting out from the earth, then at the large dirt mound between the mosque and the graveyard. He peered into the mullah's room, at the sparse furnishings, another charpai, plastic table, shelves lined with copies of the Quran and biographies of the Prophet, and framed magic squares filled with Arabic numerals and letters hanging on the walls. Nasir Khan tapped his foot on the doorstep, considering for a few moments, then turned and went to fetch the girl. His name was Khizr, and he was the mosque's imam, or had been. After the Vaba hit, and town after town, village after village fell, there wasn't anyone left to lead in prayer. For weeks, Maulvi Khizr had visited the sick and the dying, sitting by their bedsides, holding their hands, listening to them recite the declaration of faith one last time with swollen, discolored lips. He sprinkled water on their faces as they gasped and wheezed, and cleaned snot off their chins. When they passed, he helped their loved ones cart their bodies to the graveyard behind the mosque. He abandoned that practice after the bereaved died, too, and no one was left to help him move them. With my own hands, I buried 50 or more people who came to the mosque in their last hours, seeking its holy vicinity in death, Khizr said, pouring hot tea from a kettle, as the three of them sat at the rickety table in the middle of the imam's room. I prayed 15, 20 janazas daily for weeks, then took them in a wheelbarrow 5 by 5 to the ditch by the graveyard. I lowered them down as gently as I could and poured a handful of dust over each. Would that I could give them a proper burial, but I'm an old blind man, and all I could do was wait for the last person to give up the ghost before I began filling in the ditch. His teacup shook a little as he brought it to his mouth and sipped. His sightless gaze traveled over his room, and Nasir and the girl, Palvasha. She ate an entire packet of Prince chocolate biscuits and listened to the old man ramble, then to Nasir as he narrated their story. After his family and friends died, Nasir had walked around Balakot in a daze, his grief larger than the mountains that surrounded him, deeper than the emerald waters of the Kunhar River that mocked him with their swiftness, their indifference. We stop. The world doesn't stop, he thought again and again as he slept in a different bed each day in the fancy hotel he used to guard before the Vaba took everyone. No one had believed the world was ending. His neighbors had sneered, even as the Christian missionary hospital in Gurhi Habibullah sent panicked messages to the surrounding clinics, asking people to put on masks and stay at home. Stay at home. A Christian conspiracy, they said. Everyone knew the Vaba had been started by Amrika to render all Muslims impotent. But instead, Allah's wrath fell upon them and it turned on its makers. Oh yes, they'd been following the news on TV and radio, how their glittering cities fell and the infidels died in the streets. And now these Christian traitors were jumping on the bandwagon, trying to send the Muslim men home while they planned evil, satanic things in the dark of night. The people of Balakot weren't fools. They'd teach those Christian churas a lesson or two. But before a mob could form and march to the hospital, it was over. The ringleader, a man named Kadri who'd been inciting and goading the men of Balakot for days, was dead, killed by the Vaba. The plague, it turned out, was egalitarian and secular. It didn't discriminate between rich and poor, crescents and crosses. Everyone in Balakot died. Except Nasir. He buried those he could and left the rest where they had fallen, for what was the point of breaking his back? He wasn't 20 anymore. Besides, nature and rot would have their way. From mulch we come and to mulch we return. He'd found 14-year-old Palvasha rocking in an armchair by the roadside in Abbottabad, an hour from Balakot. At first, she had hidden inside a handicraft shop, she'd tell him later. But she had been alone for so long, and the voices of the dead were louder every night. Her baby sister, her brother, her father with his big, strong mechanic's hands, and her Aunt Bano, her mother's sister, who'd taken care of Palvasha after her more died from an untreated fistula gone bad. They'd begun talking to her in the silence of the night, and later, in the daytime as well. She couldn't stand it, Palvasha said. The resounding emptiness, being alone with the alone. She knew it would drive her insane. So, when she heard Nasir's motorbike in the distance, she thought, sweet death, or a friend. Were they even different now? The stench of rotting flesh still in her nostrils, she came out of her hiding place and waited for the stranger, her eyes squeezed shut, rocking, pretending she was still in her father's embrace. The tall, bearded stranger didn't hurt her. His voice was kind, and he had a knack for calming her fears. Also for finding and preserving food. Sun-drying, brining, pickling, or salting was the trick, Nasir told her, as he substituted the bike for an abandoned Toyota Corolla, its keys clutched in the driver's rotted hands. Palvasha looked away as Nasir dragged the family of 3 out of the car to the roadside and placed a rain-slick tarp over them. They won't miss it, he commented as they got into the vehicle. He wouldn't look at her, and she hoped he couldn't hear the invisible fingers tapping on the windows as they drove away, heading to Islamabad, thinking they would find life and some semblance of law and order in the capital city. They didn't. Just more dead at every chalk, traffic signal, hamlet, and bungalow. Brown kites, eagles, and vultures soared over the city, while feral cats roamed in packs. And wasn't that odd, Nasir thought one night, as they sat outside a guest house under a 14th moon, him smoking an expensive cigar he'd found in a VIP suite, Parvasha biting into a miraculously edible apple from the kitchen's cold storage that had long ago stopped working. None of the feral animals wore collars. They were all strays. Where were the expensive pure breeds of the city's rich and elite? Of all those diplomats from foreign countries, 1 week of whose cat food cost more than their chowkidar's monthly salary? They stayed in Islamabad for 3 weeks, foraging, scavenging, waiting for someone to appear, something to happen, before Nasir finally decided to try Lahore. He'd thought long and hard about it, and it made sense to him to move south. There would be more traffic of the living in the heart of Punjab. Also, there were the dreams. But he didn't tell Maulvi Khizr about them yet. Instead, he talked about the GT Road, that iconic highway built in the 16th century by the Emperor Sher Shah Suri, now desolate and crammed to the brim with dented, rusting vehicles and corpses bloated in the summer heat. They had to abandon the Corolla early on and switch to the rickshaw, which was able to navigate the obstacles on the highway far more easily and carry more than a motorbike could. Parvasha wanted to name the rickshaw. Nasir thought that silly, but really, what did it matter? They named it Parrot. And it was on GT Road near Jhelum that they had their first encounter with the wolves. Parvasha shuddered as Nasir described to Maulvi Khizr how they ran into the fields and managed to hide behind a grove of banyan trees right before the contingent rolled into view. Watching them move across the highway, laughing and herding boys and girls in ropes and chains, was the first time Nasir realized the world wasn't merely empty, but that it had been emptied of good people. Evil men, like cockroaches, had survived. Khizr counted beads on a tusbih as Nasir told their story. When he was finished, the old mullah sat in silence, his fingers telling the rosary reverently, gently, as if he were touching dewdrops, then said, "We're strange creatures, aren't we? We hope in futility that the world will change, and when it does, we long for what once was." Nasir watched fondly as Parvasha drank the last of her tea and got up. They had plenty of opportunity along the way to pick up new clothes, and she had changed into clean shalwar kurta, but despite Nasir's persuasion, she refused to throw her old green dupatta away. It must have complimented her jade eyes once, but now, oil-stained, blackened with dirt, it clung to her neck like a net of vines. She asked in accented Urdu, "Where is the bathroom?" Khizr thought for a moment. Then he gestured to a door that led to the pillared interior of the mosque. "Into the courtyard and on your left. Beta," he said to her as she shuffled to the door, "indulge an old man and recite the prayer hanging on the eastern pillar before you enter the bathroom, okay?" The girl stared at him, nodded, then remembered he couldn't see her. "Ji, Maulvi Sahib." When she'd left, Khizr turned to Nasir. "You're both welcome to stay as long as you wish. I have plenty of tinned food and spices, and there are herds of cattle and game roaming the fields around here. You'll never run out of meat if you have any skill with a gun." "I brought a few guns with me from Abbottabad." Nasir scratched his long and unkempt beard. He needed to trim it. "And I can shoot. My room is small, as you can see, and can't accommodate all of us. My advice," Khizr said, "is for the girl to either sleep outside. I can put up a couple charpais behind the mosque, or in one of the houses across the road." "We certainly don't want to inconvenience you, and we'll sleep wherever you want." Nasir studied the mullah's face. "But I don't think space is your real concern here, is it?" Khizr fell silent. Outside the postern door, Dusk extended its tentacles, covering the mullah's charpai in shadow. Hero was nowhere to be seen, after a rabbit or stray cat, perhaps. There really isn't any other way to put it. Khizr's cataract-glazed eyes were upon the courtyard door. The mosque is inhabited by jinn, and the girl isn't safe in here after dusk. Jinn. Jinn, Khizr agreed, and lifted his teacup to his lips. My grandfather used to tell stories about them. Said they lived in this area for millennia, long before people came here. When you're a child, you believe such stories. As you grow older, you laugh at them. Eventually, you forget them. He put away the cup and reached for his hookah. But they don't forget us, you see, even if we ignore them. The jinn move among us, building and migrating, majestic and silent, living their own lives that they mark in thousands of years. And when the Vaba overwhelmed us humans, they returned. Uneasily, Nasir glanced at the door. It was possible that the old man was not all there, that loneliness had worked on him as it had on all of them. But jinn were mentioned in the Quran, and in his hometown of Balakot, stories of evil jinn in the shape of cattle roaming lonely mountain roads at night were legion. Certainly, Maulvi Sahib, many thanks. We'll sleep in one of the houses. We don't intend to impose on your hospitality for too long, anyway. He got up to fetch the girl, but suddenly she was there, adjusting the discolored dupatta around her neck, staring at him with those green eyes he had always thought discomfiting, as if she could see more than she let on. There you are, child. All well? Yes. She moved her lips twice, glanced over her shoulder into the shadows pooling in the courtyard, then back at him. Yes, I think so. Maulvi Sahib? She said quietly. Who's Burkhan? Wala hawla wala quwwata. There is no strength or power except in God the eternal and majestic. Khizr's eyes had widened, the cataracts shining like white marbles. Never speak that name again, lest you call the Jinn King. Wherever did you hear it? It's on the painting of the black-haired man with the fiery eyes, hanging on the pillar next to the prayer sheet. They went out into the courtyard, where the pillars of the mosque stood dusking like ancient trees. Khizr lit 2 oil lamps and hung them up, and Nasir turned on a flashlight. They searched for nearly an hour, the old mullah squinting and patting at the walls and pillars, but they couldn't find the painting with the Jinn King's name. Nasir found he'd lied to Khizr. They ended up staying with the mullah for several months. Nasir convinced himself it was partly because he was worried about the blind old man, partly because they'd traveled a long way to get here, this green land of the Ravi and Indus with its acres of crops and fruit trees, some of which had survived thanks to the arrival of monsoon rains, and while the electric tube wells were useless and the once lush villages and towns now crumbling into dust and green decay, the hand pumps in the fields still fetched sweet water, and the mullah still gave the azan 5 times a day, his melodious call carrying across miles and miles of silence, like God's own voice over a subdued earth. But really, and it took him some time to figure it out, Nasir had stayed because of Khizr's stories. Khizr was full of them. From his childhood spent in old Lahore, where he grew up the only son of a pit wrestler, who wanted his son to follow him into the Akhara, to his youth as a truant kite flyer on the rooftops of Lahore, singing ghazals and radio songs to giggling pretty girls on neighboring roofs, and indulging in glorious peche with other kite flyers. Khizr smiled when he told this particular story, and Palva Shah reddened and left the room on some pretext. Nasir's favorite stories were of those who'd passed through the area, both before and after the Vaba. I remember this man, as old as I, Khizr said on a rainy day, as they put up a tarp canopy on the mosque's western wall and strung mosquito netting around their charpais. August had arrived, along with the monsoon season, and soon malaria would be in the air. Or would it? Could the germ survive without people? Nasir had never heard of a cat or dog getting malaria. Hero seemed to be fine as he bounded around them, barking and begging to play fetch. He and Palvasha had set up residence in one of the 4 Marla buildings across the road. The ground floor used to be a bakery, with the top floor reserved for the owner's family, which they now took over, and the smell of yeast and spoiled bread occasionally caught them by surprise, even though they'd cleared away the shelves and cleaned out the storeroom. "He was from Sergoda, traveling alone," Khizr continued. "This was a month or so after the Vaba began. His name was Allah Bakhsh. He had a walking stick, and on his shoulder a school bag in which he carried his things. He told me he was headed to the Vaga border so he could cross over into India. Why India? I asked him. He said he was born there, spent his childhood in Amritsar. When the subcontinent broke into 2, his grandmother brought him to Pakistan on a train in the middle of the night. But you take me to Amritsar train station, he told me, and I'll take you straight back home. The house where I grew up, where I cussed out Mossi Bashiran's nephew when he stole my lychees and took off on his bike laughing as I yelled and chased him, where my Veer Nazir was born and died when he was 5. We left him there and came here. How his spirit must have cried and searched for us in those streets. Allah Bakhsh's eyes were roomy when he said that. And now everyone I know is dead. My children and their children. I buried them all. So I'm going back home, across the border to my Veer to tell him I'm sorry we left him, to the place that continues to steal into my dreams." They prayed Isha together. Old Allah Bakhsh spent the night in the mosque, and in the morning he was gone without a goodbye. "I hope he made it home okay. I hope his dream was worth the journey," Khizr said, gurgling his hookah as they sat outside the mosque. A scimitar moon sliced the monsoon clouds in the sky, silvering the fields. Hero watched fireflies dance and weave through the dark with interest, and Palvasha, who had taken to the dog quickly, caressed his back with her toes. Nasir had been cleaning and slicing the 4 partridges he had shot that morning. He dropped the birds in the bucket at his feet. Dreams, he thought. "Molvi Sahib," he said, "have you had any strange dreams since the Vaba began?" Khizr pulled hard on his hookah and blew out a trembling ring that dissipated in the wind. "Why do you ask?" "I've had really weird dreams. They started when we were in Islamabad." "Oh?" "I know I'm not the only one. Palvashe has them too." He smiled at her. "You talk in your sleep." The girl shifted in her chair and trailed one hand across Hero's fur. "So I'm wondering, have you or anyone you knew had any out-of-the-ordinary dreams?" "You ask dangerous questions." Khizr picked up a twig and stirred the coals in the hookah's cup. "Yes." It turned out that about a month into the Vaba, all 3 of them, and others who'd passed by, began having similar dreams. They described to each other the strange-looking house in a cornfield in the middle of a strange country, the dusky woman who lived there, and her odd, soothing songs played on a guitar, sung with her face in shadow, always turned away from them. They couldn't understand her words, but all 3 had the feeling that they weren't meant to. Her songs were for someplace else. "Amrika, I think." Nasir poured fresh water into the bucket of partridges and added salt into it until it wouldn't dissolve anymore. He pushed a zip-locked bag of ice into the water and let it settle on top of the meat. "Before the Vaba, we would have American guests stay at the hotel sometimes. They spoke like that woman, although her accent seems thicker. She is old, that one." "She is," Palvasha said, watching the darkness of the fields. "Really old. She makes me feel safe, though. I like dreaming of her and her songs. But Nasir Lala, I don't think she's calling us. I don't think we are meant to answer her call." Khizr nodded. "I believe our dear Palvasha has it right. I think we're eavesdropping on an invite extended to others." He hesitated, his brow furrowed more than usual. When I was a child, I used to like watching wrestling matches in my father's akara. And now I feel as if we're watching the beginning of a wrestling match, and the akara is being set up, only this particular akara and its players belong only to that faraway land. It is not our land, and neither she nor that other are interested in us. At this, Palvasha started and sat up, the jade of her eyes darkening. Her grip on Hero tightened, till the dog whimpered and twisted his neck to give her a watery look. I think you know whom I'm speaking of, Khizr continued. I won't talk about him much, that son of darkness. He's worse than any djinn or devil I've ever felt. He's been invading my dreams for as long as that old woman. Nightmares that make me clench my jaw so hard some mornings I wake up with a bloody mouth. He terrifies me. But again, I don't think his evil is meant to haunt us here, which is a damned relief, I must tell you. I've dreamed of him only once or twice. Mostly it's been the old lady. Nasir tossed some cut lemons into the brine bucket and watched them float. And a good thing, isn't it, that we don't have to go look for either of them? He grinned. Who the fuck would give us visas to visit Amrika? They laughed at that, and Nasir was glad to see Palvasha settle into a serene silence. 6 weeks into their sojourn here, the girl had turned 15, but her fears and nightmares were older and deeper than his and the mullah's put together. He'd seen her glance at shadows and mutter when she thought he wasn't looking. Was it a response to loss and terror? She had been utterly alone for nearly 4 weeks before he found her. He reached over and pressed the girl's hand. They smiled at each other, and again there was that feeling, that depth, that veil, as if she said less than she knew, as if the world itself was a mirage only her green gaze could pierce. Soon the rains petered away, breaking the humidity's back. October manifested quicker than a beggar's curse, and suddenly GT Road was filled with people. They came from every direction, traveling in groups of all sizes. Solo travelers, ragtag bands, a few groups composed only of children, de novo families banded together for survival. Lured by the muezzin's call, they gravitated toward the trio hoping for abode and civilization, and instead found a tiny town mosque run by a blind imam. They offered a few collective prayers, slept a night or two in the sanctum, shared their meals and stories, and moved on. Some stayed. An apprentice carpenter, 2 farmer cousins, a car mechanic, a former policeman with a sweetmeat belly and his new road wife, a group of teens and children led by a young schoolteacher named Ujala, who had a strong Punjabi accent and protected her wards fiercely with a long knife in her belt and a shotgun on her shoulder. They need lessons not just in survival, but also science, history, art, and empathy, Ujala told them, smiling at old Khizr. And who better to team up with me than a Quran teacher? Yes, we will stay with you, Maulvi Sahib, if you will have us. A community of sorts blossomed around the mosque on GT Road, much like others must have along this grand road in the time of the great Emperor Sher Shah, and long before him, when the road was an ancient trade route sprouting from the mouth of the Ganges up to the northwestern edges of India and into Afghanistan. All roads are special, magical, said Ujala to her pupils in the mosque courtyard one morning. But this road is sacred. It is older than our collective memory, and it is along this road that a new world will be born. No more borders will break its spine. Instead, it will pulse again with life, like an artery through the hearts of all the regions that once comprised India, the land of the Indus. At first, Nasir was shocked at the teacher's speculations, her reckless confidence. This was Pakistan, a Muslim homeland procured with the blood of 1 million dead, for God's sake. But the more he listened to her, the more he watched the slow drift of humanity along the highway and thought what others across the border in Afghanistan, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Bhutan must be suffering, how they must slowly be developing their own communities. The more he began to be convinced that she was right. Old borders wouldn't work anymore. They would all return to little towns along roads and rivers. They'd have a chance to fix things again, and maybe this time they wouldn't fuck everything up. One could dream. One morning he and Khizr came upon Palvasha mending a hole in her dupatta. The weather was perfect. A soft, cool breeze blowing from the north, the sky a deep blue striped with egg white. Under the mosque's canopy, Palvasha sat on the edge of her charpai stitching, chewing her lips, a faraway look in her eyes. She stopped and looked up when they approached her. "Sanga halde," Nasir said. "Good, Lala. Salam, Maulvi Sahib." She resumed her sewing. "Sleep well?" "What with helping Fawad and Murtaza on the farmland," Nasir put a hand on his back and grimaced. "I sleep like a baby these days. You?" She made a seesaw gesture with her needle hand. "Still having bad dreams?" She shook her head, licked her lips. Khizr said softly, "Is it wise to hold so much in, child?" "Holding? I've shared my dreams with you two." She glanced up, and Nasir noticed the deep, bruise-like hollows under her eyes. She sighed. "But not all of them. Maulvi Sahib, I dream of more. So much more." "What is it, Palvashe Bache?" Nasir asked. And now that she'd spoken, it was as if a river poured out torrentially, her words tumbling and falling over each other. "I dream of the ruins of a shrine, a six-sided blue-striped building with towers in each corner. It's damaged on one side and huddles close to two other buildings in a city where many such buildings are scattered, joined by winding streets and roads. And all of this near 5 roaring rivers that used to rage past the shrine but have now meandered away and conjoined into one monster of a river. I see the water of that river in my dream. It's blue and so beautiful, and there are sand islands in it." Dropping her sewing needle, she reached out and clutched Nasir's shirt. "Lala, the town is dead, but I see it filling with life. I see caravans of cars and bikes and rickshaws and people on horse and donkey carts making their way to this tiny city where they will build again, and there is no evil there except that of the whisperer. No evil greater than his, who having whispered once slithers away, then turns back with glee and whispers again in the hearts of men." She stopped as suddenly as she'd begun and let go of Nasir's shirt. Her face was pale. She let her arm drop limp by her side, and Hero, who'd been exploring go-holes in the fields, came around sniffing and began to nuzzle her hand. "I don't know where this place is, and I don't know when we're supposed to go there." Palvasha stroked the dog's ears. "All I know is our time here is brief, and that makes me afraid. Sad and afraid." "Ah, there's nothing to be afraid of, Bache. You're safe here. We're safe," Nasir said. But his heart beat in his temples, and his soul was uneasy. He guided Khizr across the highway to the policeman Rashid's house. As they walked away, he said to the mullah, "What do you make of that?" Khizr didn't answer for a few moments. He had the rosary in his hand again, and the beads shook as he counted them. Finally, he said, "Ouch." "What?" "Ouch, Sharif. About 500 kilometers south. The Alexandrian city of saints near the Panchnad, where the 5 rivers come together. I believe that's the city Palvasha is describing. The shrine is of Bibi Jundi, a woman saint from the 15th century." They reached Rashid's door. Nasir knocked, and as they waited, Khizr quietly said, "Palvasha isn't the only one who's dreamed of it. I've seen it too, and I think she's right. Sooner or later you'll be making your pilgrimage there." He hesitated. Then his face turned resolute. "But I don't think that journey is for me. I don't think I will be joining you." Troubled, Nasir turned to him, but the door was open and the burly policeman and his pretty young wife Fatima Their arms, interlinked, were beaming at them, asking them to come in. Bowls of steaming lentils fresh from the pot were waiting for them, and Nasser never got to finish that conversation with the old mullah. Madame Ujala was a punctilious teacher, but not all pupils of the school teacher turned road warrior were so diligent. Some of them played truant while class was in session, and went exploring the countryside perforated with go and snake holes, running through fields of spoiled crops with glee. On a gray midday in November, when northeasterly winds brought a lashing of cold rain to Sheikhupura, turning soft winter trails into squelching mud, one such delinquent saved their community. The 12-year-old's name was Hashim, but everyone called him Jamun due to the exquisitely dark color of his skin. This particular afternoon, Jamun had wandered nearly 5 miles away from the mosque school. He was hopping from puddle to puddle, splashing and stomping his way across a field, when he heard a distant bang. He leaned on his walking branch, squinting to see beyond the low mist of the fields. The rain had stopped a while ago, and all was quiet except the dripping of water from trees and the soothing, frog-like chirping of quails. The sound came again, and this time there were 3 of them in rapid succession, the report familiar but chilling, and Jamun instantly dropped to his haunches. For a moment he lingered, then began creeping through the mud until he found himself at the edge of the highway behind an old banyan. He pressed himself against its rough bark and peered around the truck. 20 feet away, 5 men, long rifles slung over their shoulders, stood in a semicircle around a big, mustached man in an army uniform, a revolver in his hands. Behind them, several pickup trucks filled with more armed men smoked on the eastern highway, flanking a chain of prisoners who stood shivering in the cold. In front of the mustached man, a body lay twitching in a pool of blood, and as Jamun watched, the man stepped forward and kicked the dying person in the head. Jamun's lips smashed together to hold back a cry. Very slowly he lowered himself to the ground and backed away on all 4s until he was invisible behind rows of ruined sugarcane. Then he got up and sprinted back to the mosque, praying no bullet would shatter his spine as he fled. Nasser and Khizr took the boy's testimony seriously. Wooden barricades and rusted oil drums, manned by Rashid and 2 others, were immediately put up on the highway. Runners were sent to all the houses to gather the community in the mosque's courtyard. Palvasha and Khizr led children and the older women into the prayer hall, while Nasir and Ujala handed out guns and bullets to the able-bodied men, women, and youths. They had 14 guns, for a total of 15 who knew how to shoot, more than half of that number teenagers. 6 handguns, 4 shotguns, 1 G3 rifle, and 3 AK-47 Kalashnikovs in possession of men posted on rooftops. Even that, Nasir thought, was a miracle. Most people hadn't brought ammunition with them to the mosque community. Judging from Jamun's account, they were outmanned and likely outgunned. Ujala was unfazed. "You wait for my cry," she told them, her face dark with rage, the long knife glinting on her belt. "And then you don't hesitate. You shoot every single one of those sister fuckers. You shoot like our lives and our children's lives depend on it." The whole thing had taken them less than an hour. Armed and ready, they now waited for the cavalcade of the wolves. It arrived around 3 in the afternoon. 6 pickup trucks escorting a human train slowly down the highway. Dull-faced and dusty men, women, and children with iron chains on their feet and a long rope tethering them together. Despite the cold, they were dressed in flimsy shalwar kameez. Sweaters and jackets were reserved for young girls only, Nasir noted. Prize meat, he thought with disgust, as next to him Ujala and Rashid raised their weapons and pointed them at the enemy. A tall, powerfully built man with a wheatish complexion and bushy mustache disembarked from the first truck that reached the barricade. He wore army khakis and a vest with what looked like a submachine gun slung over his left shoulder, and he was smiling brightly at them. He leaned against the barricade and spoke in a booming voice. "Salam and blessings. So wonderful to meet you all." About a dozen similarly uniformed armed men got out of the pickups and spread out behind their leader, guns lifted in Nasir and Ujala's general direction.
"Wonderful for you, maybe,"
Ujala called back.